Hello and welcome to the session where we will continue our developments in JavaScript. And today we'll be looking at variable types. So the setup is similar to last time, just that we are showing this in split screen mode so that we can look at the code on one side and the results on the other. So here's the browser, Firefox, and we'll be looking mainly in the console. So as before, we have the HTML file, which is just serving the page for us, and we'll do our real work in JavaScript itself. So let's create a JavaScript file, varbs.js. So new, and I'm going to create a function. Let's just call it show varbs. And we'll save this. So this is varbs.js. Okay, and we're going to explore the different types of variables available in JavaScript. So number one, we have Boolean variables. So Boolean variables, so true and false type variables. And let's look at a simple comparison between two numbers. So let's log out whether 2 is more than 3. And we know this is obviously false. So we expect the result of this to be a false. So let's save that and let's just set up our document to run show varbs. So show varbs. And we'll just run that function without sending in any arguments. We will discuss in a later video creating functions and some of the subtleties there. But for now, just know that calling show varbs like this will run show varbs, the function, and that will run if we've included the file. So we can see the file varbs.js is included, and in varbs.js, we gain access to the function show varbs. So in our browser, if we just run this, we can see we get the false as expected. So now let's look for the true version of that. So console.log, we know 3 is more than 2. And so if we save that and run it here, then we can see we get the true as well. So the first statement is false, and we get the false here. And the second statement is true, so we get the true there. So those are Boolean variables. And we also have, of course, integer variables, or integer values, I should say. So integers, and these are Booleans, right? We will talk about the creation of variables in the video after this. So we can just use integers by referencing the value. So if we just console log 10, if we use the number 10, then that's understood to be an integer. So if we run that, we see we get the 10. And of course, we can do the operations on the integers, like adding them together and so on. So console log 10 plus 20, and we get the 30 as expected. Right, let's just create, okay, that's the biggest. And then next we have strings. So if we have in here console.log, and in fact, let's use double quotes. So if we say console log 10, and if we run this, we can see we get the 10, but the color here is a bit different to the color we got here. So when, at least in Firefox, in this console, it highlights numbers and Booleans with greens and strings with it doesn't highlight with green. So to actually see that's a string, we can also try an operation like this. So we can say console log 10 plus 20. And if we run this, you can see 10 plus 20, in contrast to when we add integers, 10 plus 20 as strings gives us 1020 as one string. So this is simply concatenation of strings, right? Now, it's often the case that in our web applications, we are receiving user input and so on. And so we do need to be able to receive numbers in the form of string types, and we will often need to convert those back to numbers. And to do that, we can use the parse function. So baked into JavaScript is parse int. If we say parse int 10, then at least the color highlighting seems to say we have an integer now. And we can test this by trying to do an addition. So if we say parse int 20 plus parse int 10, then we get the expected 30, right? So that's parse int. And we also have parse float. So let's say we have a string of, well, with these decimal values. And if we try here a parse int, so if we try and parse that to an integer, then it does give us an integer. Oops. So that console logs that. So this, so the result here that we are seeing is the result of this console logging, and then we haven't included a console log here. So it does pass this, but then it doesn't do anything with the value because we haven't told it to do anything. So we should say console log parse int 10.2345. And you can see if we pass a string with decimals, if we are passing it to an integer, then it gives us the integer equivalent to that. So instead, if we pass to a float, so we can say parse float, then we can see we get a number that's a floating point number. It's not a string anymore. And to test that, we can try adding a number to it. So let's just add 20 to that. And so we can see it has added correctly. So that's parse int, parse float, and that's how we can convert between strings and numbers. And then we also did see that if you have two strings, you can simply concatenate them. So using the plus operator. So if we say hello plus world, then it will give us hello world as expected. Right, and I had to add that space in there. Of course, in the addition, it's not going to add these spaces. These spaces are outside of the scope of the string. So that's why we need to add this extra space in here. Okay, so that's how we can introduce strings using double quotes. Single quotes also work. So we can use hello plus single quote world. So there's that. We get the same result. But there is another special way of creating strings. So if we say console.log, and we use backticks, right? So the backticks, that's on your keyboard, that's typically to the left of the number 1. So if you use backticks, then you can access variables inside of the string. So if we'd like to say, for instance, the answer to 10 plus 20 is, and then let's say we wanted to do the calculation inside of the string. Let's say we didn't want to create a variable or anything like that and try and add and convert that to a string and add it here and so on. Then we could basically create a kind of a link that goes outside of the string, returns a result and puts the result into the string. So if we use dollar and curly brackets, then we can evaluate expressions in here. So if we say 10 plus 20 in here, then that will evaluate the contents of this, right? So the operator dollar and curly braces, and then the result of that will be returned as a string, which will then replace this. So we expect to see the answer to 10 plus 20 is 30. So if we run that, then we can see we get the expected result there. All right, so backticks tremendously helpful for inline quick modifications to a string. We should also look at the result of adding a string and a number. So if we say here console log, and I tend to use backticks only. So let's say string 1 plus 10. So we have a string here and a number there. And we can't add a number to a string. That's an undefined. We don't know what the result of that might be. But we can imagine that, right? So we don't have an easy way to convert string 1 to a number and then to add it to 20. So that way it won't work, but we can convert 20 to a string and add it to that first string. We know addition in the context of strings is simply concatenation, where we just stack the strings together. So let's run that. And oops, I missed the log, so console.log. And so we can see string 120, it's just a concatenation of what we listed here. So that's, of course, we could also imagine that there are instances where it may be possible to evaluate it. So if we read this, we could reasonably say, well, here we are just trying to add 10 to 20, but a compiler doesn't assume anything like that. So if we simply concatenate a string with anything else, it will assume that we want string concatenation. It will not try to do the type conversion for us. So it is important when dealing with variables to ensure that we are in the right type and things like that. So that's a brief introduction to the basic types of variables, to Boolean variables and numbers and strings in JavaScript.